Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, welcome to another installment of the Lectores series of the UT MFA program. I'm Don Morrill, UT faculty member and also a mentor in the MFA program. And I am here to introduce tonight's guest, Kristen Arnett, in the name of Erica Dawson. Erica has been ill throughout a lot of this residency and is not able to be here with us tonight, but she has sending words. So I don't even know if I can say it this way, but imagine Erica saying these words, okay? Because it's not going to sound the same coming from me. Okay, here it is. I can't remember when I met Kristen. It likely was at a reading or party hosted by Borough Press in Orlando. It likely was a reading or party where Kristen and I both had too many cheap wines or cheap beers to remember anything. I can't even remember here. While our beginning is a little hazy, I'm sure about this. Kristen Arnett is one of the most talented writers I've ever met. Her story collection, Felt in the Jaw, published by Split Lip Press, is one of my favorite collections published in the last few years. I'm a huge fan of her library column on LitHub, especially, "Are you pregnant? Can I have some creamer?" and other questions I get at the library, and "Ain't no party like a library party." Quote. I sometimes think Kristen is so gifted because as a librarian she spends so much time with books, as if she's the perfect example of the old adage, writers learn the most from what they read. But that's not it. Kristen is simply ridiculously talented. And now, with the recent publication of her debut novel, cue the book, Mostly Dead Things, by Tin House, only a few weeks ago, people are taking notice, a lot of notice. People like Oprah Magazine, Nylon, Esquire, Buzzfeed, and the New York Times. Actually, the New York Times has taken notice 3 times, yes, 3, in the last 4 weeks. Yes, Mostly Dead Things does everything I, as a reader, want a novel to do. Wonderfully weird characters, bizarre yet totally normal circumstances, language both luscious and raw, everything somehow concrete and surreal. You can't help but join Jessa, the main character, as she navigates her world, no matter how much you want to be part of it, no matter how much it disturbs you. As you read, that world becomes your own. I couldn't be happier to have Kristen here at UT, and I do. Really, I would be way happier if I could be there while Kristen is here at UT. Not only is she an incredible writer, she is the sweetest person. And that, if that's not enough, she's a Twitter legend. Legend, all caps. Earlier today, after arriving at the Sheraton, she tweeted, "Walking into the giant hotel room in Tampa with the massive balcony view of the river and yelled, 'What the fuck?' so loud. Someone cleaning the door in the room next door laughed at me. I brought 7-Eleven wine with me and I will be drinking it on this goddamn balcony. Thank you very much," unquote. So that's a quote inside a quote, just so you know where we are, okay? Kristen, thank you for being you and for always being you. I couldn't be happier to be pressmates, Tin House Squad for life. Let's give Kristen a huge welcome to our UT stage, Kristen Arnett.
Oh, Erica. That's fucking lovely. Yeah, honestly, the balcony was really big, and I was not anticipating it. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm so pleased. I love being in Florida. I love Tampa. Technically, Tampa is a ravioli. So yeah, I'm super pleased to be here, like thrilled to death. And just really glad with the reception that this book has had, since it to me feels like a home book, and home for me is Florida, and Florida is very special to me. So it has felt very important to me that people have engaged with it as a book about Florida in a way that I hope is the way that I see Florida, and that maybe other people see Florida, versus like Florida Man or Weird Florida or whatever kind of news footage we usually get. Like, because, I mean, I think Florida's weird, but I also think it's very funny and great. So I'm just going to go ahead and read from the book. I'm going to start from the beginning. Thank you for being here and for listening to me. And sure, yeah. Is this better? Fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much. So I don't think I need to tell you anything. This book is a book about a lesbian taxidermist who takes over her family's taxidermy business after her father kills himself. There's a lot of taxidermy. Okay. How we slice the skin. Carefully, that's a given. Cutting with precision sounds like the same thing, but it's not. Consider the following. You've pared the flesh from a mango for a bowl of fruit salad. Have you done it thoughtfully, preserving the sweet yellow flesh, or have you done it with the clinical detachment of a surgeon? There's got to be some tenderness. There's got to be some love. Our father said this as he slid his knife into the coat of a white-tailed buck. It was unusual. He never let us close to the table while he worked. You got to want it. He pointed to the throat, tapping lightly with a fingertip. Start below the cape here, like you're unzipping a jacket. Milo and I crowded at either side of the metal table as our father gently opened the body, his hands blue-gloved and steady, as if delivering a baby. We were 9 and 10 and treated the shop with its creatures like our personal toy store. Other kids had stuffed animals. We had preserved skinks and mounted bass and antlers coated with varathane. Give me a little elbow room, guys. We each stepped back half a foot and then moved in close a few seconds later. The buck was large, but I'd seen bigger. The deer had already been drained of its blood and lay limp, limbs sprawled like a dismantled puppet. It was a 9-pointer, and the man who brought it to the shop was a regular, someone our father had over for beers in our living room. Our father didn't look at us while he spoke, just kept his voice at a low buzz that zinged in my brain. If it's not done with some kind of feeling, the customers can tell. It won't look real. Buckets set at our feet for any leftover innards the customers hadn't disposed of already. White plastic tubs that at one point housed pickles soaked in yellow brine. Some entrails we saved, some we didn't, but we always made sure the floor stayed clean. The smell of bleach saturated my cloud of dark hair, even when my mother braided it out of the way. Milo and I both wore old Publix bag boy aprons tied around our necks and backs in looping double knots. Though I was older by a year, Milo stood half a head taller than me, taller than anyone in the 4th grade. We leaned close to our father's elbows, trying to catch the knife's movements until he cleared his throat and we moved back again. He wore a black rubber apron that he'd rinse off in the back sink, slicking off the intestinal remnants of our daily autopsies with lemon-scented dish detergent. Our mother'd wash ours and hang them in the front closet next to our muddy sneakers and raincoats and the mothballed sweaters that we only wore once a year. Jessalyn held the neck steady. I moved to the front of the table and dug my hands into the fur until the spine and tendons compressed beneath my fingers. I fought the urge to massage deeper, to let my hands crawl spider-like up the column and embrace the muzzle. Now come here, son, it's not going to bite. From behind the deer's fuzzy cheek, I watched my brother take the knife from my father, a double-sided scalpel. On the table beside it sat the half-moon of the fleshing blade he'd used to strip the wet hunks of flesh from the skin. Its curve caught the light, blinking silver under the fluorescent bulbs that lined the paneled ceiling. Like this? Milo clutched the knife like he would a sharpened stick, something to gouge and mutilate. He fidgeted and nearly dropped his grip as he dug down into the deer hide. Let me show you. Flex your wrist. Press steady, slow, not too deep. According to our father, customers wanted something commanding in the animal's pose. Most were hunters, and if they chose to have their kill mounted, they wanted it larger than life, as if the animal might reanimate an attack. They wanted bigger, stronger, more muscled. Our job was to grant that wish, even if the person shot the animal from behind as it nosed through a garbage can. Milo sweat through the neck of his shirt. It was cool in the back of our shop, low 60s to keep the inevitable rot at bay, but my brother looked like he'd just run in for the playground. I'm not sure. Like this? He pulled up the knife, jagged, moving too quickly. There was a purring tear. Sorry. Grunting, my father took my brother's hand and guided it back down to the work. It'll have to be repaired. I have to stitch it up after we tan so the lines won't show through crooked. Sorries wouldn't fix the coat. There'd always be a scar, something out of place to mimic the fat bullet hole behind its tufted ear. Ripped pelts weren't ideal, but there were ways to cover them. Mud flecked up on an ankle, or the fur combed over in a way that suggested muscle mass beneath the skin. I ran my thumbs down the buck's neck to the softest place at the heart of its throat. Its white hair had grown in a clumped oval framed by the thicker, slick stuff that coated its back, the dense coat that grew in for winter, even in Florida. There. Push hard, just below the fetlock. You gotta scoop along, like you're pulling open canvas. Let the knife become an extension of your arm. Milo's blade slowed. They'd reached a blockage behind the back right leg. My father took the scalpel from my brother and squatted down to view the situation, lifting the carcass and turning it deftly. One hand pulled the skin taut while the other slid the knife below the lump that protruded from beneath the fur. He quickly sliced the flesh and poked the knife beneath, flicking the tip upward until the mass was exposed. "What is it?" Milo's face was ashy gray, his lips, normally petal pink, so pink that boys from school joked that he wore lipstick, had thinned to a pale slit. "Deer tumor." Our father carved out the lump until it began to separate from the fatty flesh and veins that surrounded it. Pretty good size, maybe 4 inches across. He hefted the mass in his hand, the vibrant blue of his glove clashing with the dark, clotted red of the tumor. He dug into it with the fleshing blade, testing the resistance of the growth. Hardly ever see any this big. Mostly just warty stuff around the neck, sometimes the groin. Milo covered his mouth with both hands. A deep noise rumbled in his chest, a sound like gears grinding together, and then he turned and puked. We'd had tomato soup and grilled cheese an hour earlier. Most of it went in the big plastic bucket, but some of it splattered onto the concrete floor, with a few bits landing on our father's shoe. The buck's eyes were open, surfaces glazed and beginning to harden into wrinkles along the corners from where the water had leached. Milo continued to vomit into the bucket as our father stalked from the table. He brought wet rags from the corner sink, waited until Milo was done, still slumped over on the floor before thrusting one at him. "Get the mop from your mother out front and clean us all up, everything." The tumor sat on the metal table, my father's knife still stuck in it. He took the blade by the handle and pressed on either side of the mass with his fingers until it pulled free. Wiping it against the other rag, he turned and offered it to me. Overhead, the air conditioning hummed to life again. The breeze was cool against my neck as I took the knife. It was solid in my palm, the curvature of the handle fitting just inside the crease where my hand closed. He beckoned me around the table, and I stood in front of him, contemplating the buck's substantial bulk. "See, there?" He held my wrist, gently pointing the knife toward the open wound, now taking on oxygen and darkening. "We'll have to work around it. Can you get below the leg and take the seam around the back?" Behind us, Milo dragged in the yellow mop bucket. Some of the water splashed over the lip and onto the floor as he struggled through the doorway. Our mother called to him from the front of the shop. My father turned away from my brother and leaned down to whisper in my ear, "You're a natural, just like your dad." It felt right. It felt like I'd been doing it forever. I could see the exact place I'd set the blade and strip the animal, knew how we'd replicate the skeleton with trusses and padding and roughed forms. I could see where the tanned hide would fit over the preparation. A strong, hardy deer, head uplifted, sniffing the wind. Inserting the tip of the blade into the opening, I pulled forward carefully. I let myself love the buck on the table. I caressed its soft, sweet body. My father put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed lightly. Leaning forward, I braced my arm against the cool metal of the table and looked into the cavity where the flesh separated from the skin. In the dark heart of its carcass, I saw my future mapped out in gristle. I was my father's daughter, and I loved him fiercely. We had identical hands, and neither of us could roll our tongues. Both of us snapped using our ring fingers, which we thought was very funny. There were permanent frown lines etched between our eyes. We liked the crusts off pizza and the tartness of lemons squeezed in water. There was a security in seeing myself mirrored back. Our shared love of the animals, the way we could be in a room and stay silent, comfortable in our skins as long as we were together. No one knew me like him. No one understood him like his daughter. Not so different from us, Jessa. He tugged my braid. Just guts and blood. We were a family of taxidermists. We were collectors, dismantlers, and artisans. We pieced together life from the remnants of death. Animals that might have weathered into nothing got to live on indefinitely through our care. Our heart was in the curve of a well-rendered lip smoothed over painted teeth. I saw my father's hand in the ears of the rabbit he created for my brother, the one that rode on a small doll's bicycle. It was in the glass eyes of an albino ferret whose lids my father sculpted with the utmost tenderness. We created better than anyone because we loved it more, because we knew those animals better than anyone else ever could. It was ours because we fashioned it to be ours. My father molded me to assist him, to be the one who helped shoulder the load. He was the linchpin that held our family's world together, but I was the one who supported him. I could always bear the burden because he told me I was strong, because he told me I was the only one who could. I tried to tell myself this as I stared down at the blood and matter congealed on the concrete floor of our workshop, as I assessed the droplets that dotted the white cinder block walls in a Rorschach pattern that my eyes identified as a butterfly, as two men shaking hands, as the entrance to a well that opened into something infinite. Let my eyes follow the sight line of the red mess, which had originated from the soft place in my father's skull. Somewhere near the temple, but I couldn't be sure. It was hard to look at for longer than a few seconds, hard to believe it was real. Behind me, softly, the radio played Randy Jackson. He was in his chair, slumped over the metal counter where he'd spent so much of his life, face down, head turned to the side so that I could make out the bristle of his mustache. The eye I could see was closed. His wire-frame glasses had slipped halfway down his nose the moment he'd fallen, one side bent crookedly behind his ear so his hair fluffed up to a graying point. I could almost make myself believe he'd dropped off to sleep, mid-project, which he sometimes did, working into the small hours of the morning, painstakingly stitching hide beneath the light of a gooseneck lamp. If he just woke up and grouched at me for staring at him. If he smiled at me so I could feel okay. If he were breathing. If there weren't so much blood. It was the whole animal laid out in front of me again, unnatural and unknown. That was the first collaboration with my father. This would be the last. Though I knew I shouldn't, I took off his glasses and smoothed down the cowlick in his wiry hair. I moved his hands from the table and set them in his lap, one propped on either thigh, how he always liked to sit at the dinner table while my mother prepped the meal. I unbuckled the watch from his wrist with trembling fingers, the watch that had been my grandfather's before it belonged to him, the one I'd coveted because it was my father's favorite and he cherished it, things that were his that I wanted to be mine. His watch, all the best knives, his shop, his pride. I picked up the handgun from where it lay on the floor. He taught me how to shoot with that gun, taken me out to the backyard, just the two of us, and helped me pull the trigger. I was scared, but I wanted to look tough because my father couldn't stomach crybabies. He smiled and told me how impressed he was with my aim and my confidence. Put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed, how he always did when he was proud of me. He was always proudest when I refused to show weakness. My little Minnie, he said, best sharpshooter in Florida. Then I went to the back and pulled out the mop bucket and the bleach, staring hard into the water as it churned in the yellow tub. Told myself it was the fumes that teared me up as I dunked the mop head into the liquid and then began the slow process of cleaning up the mess. I left the letter on the counter until I could get myself under control, wondering if it would say anything to help me understand the animal in front of me. Okay, so we're going to move in a little bit further. I was debating whether to read this one, but I think that I'm going to do it. I'm going to read something I haven't read yet. Test audience, thank you. This is a chapter about rabbits, kind of. Movement under my hand broke the spell. Don't stop. Why'd you stop? Fingers splayed wide on her bare skin. I prayed the fluttering away. Let myself think it was an anomaly. Maybe her stomach was upset, something that could be cured by antacids. Here, like this. Bryn moved my palm from where I'd cupped her belly button and dragged it down, lower, until it edged the thin lace of her underwear. Shadows licked her skin, dotting her breasts and hips in dripping gray. Rain drummed against the driveway and the white oaks in a thick, continual beat that slurred into white noise. We were cocooned in a nest of blankets that smelled like my father's aftershave and my mother's lemon talcum powder. A single tap against my temple. Where'd you go? Her nose dug into my neck. She snuffled, rooting around, and I curled my head to the side, trying to trap her there. My arm slid around her stomach, and then I felt it again, a kind of squirming, a wriggling set low in her belly. New life burbled and popped. I'd felt it there before. We both knew what it meant. She rolled away and propped her head on her folded arms, staring out the window. Yeah, she sighed. I know. That morning, I'd said bunny bunny to my 4-year-old nephew as I walked into my parents' kitchen. He was standing at the counter with my mother as she pressed orange halves on a citrus squeezer. I smiled at him and he smiled back, his mouth a solid block of orange from where he'd bitten down into a stray segment. What's nummy nummy? Bastian mumbled, tongue working around the peel. He choked, and it was a wet, sticky sound. Poor Florida baby couldn't handle the constant pollen drifting onto all our cars and staining the roads yellow. It made him hack and wheeze, a 40-year-old smoker's cough, pale eyes forever bottomed out with purple smudges. Keeps us safe from monsters, I said. I dug the peel from between his lips, tossing it into the overflowing garbage. Milo, my brother, never took out the trash, said he was too tired when he got home from work. Bryn said he never had time for her, that they never had sex anymore, and I was fine with that. It means good luck. If you say it on the first of the month, everything will turn out perfect, just how you want it. Bastian closed his eyes. Bunny, bunny. He held up one finger and blew on it like you would a birthday candle. It rained every day that May, sky drowning the world at 4 o'clock before the sun came out again to boil the leftover water off the pavement. The world cracked open and smelled fresh cut, seeping green over everything. I drove with the windows down and inhaled the world. The dank scent of wet dirt at a construction site, orange clay smoothed into wet puddles at the high school baseball field, the fruity shampoo as my hair whipped around my face. Even the festering dumpster beside a traffic light held appeal. It all teemed with life. There were birds nesting in the eaves of the taxidermy shop. When one of the babies fell out and cracked its neck, I spent a whole afternoon carefully preserving it for Bastian. Every day my mother made scrambled eggs with sharp cheddar cheese, Milo's favorite. The 3 of them had moved back into my parents' house on the premise of saving money to buy one of their own. Milo's old room had been converted to a sewing studio, so the 3 of them shored up in my childhood bedroom. They slept every night beneath the tattered posters that still clung to the dark wood paneling, bands Bryn and I used to like, and movies we watched in high school. My brother, whom I loved, curled up with the woman I loved beneath my red and white quilt. Milo said he was glad Bryn spent all her time with me since he was always gone. Said he knew I'd take care of her and make sure she was happy. He smiled as he said it, never a moment's pause that I'd be touching his wife as soon as he walked out the door. How could he not know? I wondered. How could he think anything less was happening when he knew I'd had her first? Milo's job at the Lexus dealership was 45 minutes away. He got up early and came home late, taking overtime and working holidays. It was a low-paying gig that didn't require any previous experience, which was good because his resume took up less than half a sheet of paper. He'd gotten the job through one of his high school buddies. It was the first time he'd ever really tried, and it didn't agree with him. If I make it through the 90-day trial period, I'll be set for a promotion, he said. Just gonna make it through these first 90, and then it won't be like this anymore. Get our own place, have another kid. On his days off, he stayed in bed until mid-afternoon and then ventured out to the kitchen for a sandwich before passing out on the couch again. He looked tired all the time, skin grayed out and hair lank with grease. His polos were never clean. Bryn sometimes did laundry, but we both acted like kids on summer vacation. She let my mother do the chores as we hung out and watched TV. When Milo came home, he'd kiss Bryn first thing. She leaned into it so hard I could hear their teeth click together. You take such good care of us, she'd say, drawing a line down his cheek with the fingernail I'd painted for her. Who else would love me so much? No one sweeter than you, baby. He'd look better then, and I knew it was all worth it to him, the long hours, the driving, just to come home to her and Bastian. Listening in on these whispered conversations, I tried to imagine myself in my brother's position and couldn't make the image stick. I knew what she wanted from each of us, the things we provided. I watched my brother work himself to death, saw how he was still able to be emotionally there for her, and wished I could be the kind of person who could do both. I came over every day on my lunch break from the shop, eating leftover crusts from Bastian's peanut butter and honey sandwiches. I like our little family. Bryn snuck her hand into the crease of my elbow, and I'd let it sit there, collecting sweat, mine and hers. Something I could take home and keep at the end of the day, wherein I drank rum and cokes next to the busted AC unit in my apartment. Drunk, thinking about the kind of person I was, taking from the people I cared about, taking because if I didn't take what I needed, I might die. We sat at the dining room table and ate ham sandwiches for lunch. Bastian slurped speckled cereal milk from a yellowing Tupperware. Between bites of cinnamon toast crunch, he touched the little bunnies in their basket with a gentle hand, the kits my father and I had lovingly worked on for several weeks, attempting to perfect the downy sweetness found in mammal babies. My father found them in a cardboard box inside our garage, cuddled in a nest of shredded newspapers and telephone books pages. Asphyxiated, carbon monoxide from the car engine. He cupped one in his palm, body the size of a fat dinner roll. When I took it from him, its neck flopped back until the head was lying over my fingers, limp and dangling. "We'll give him to your mom." I stroked its downy back. It was still warm. "Makes a good Easter gift. Peter Rabbit, right?" We each took two, bisecting the bodies through their tiny white bellies. There was barely anything to remove. They were so young. Their skulls were dainty, the size of an apricot. I scrubbed them carefully with a toothbrush, washing their coats in the washroom sink. I dried them with a blow dryer in a low setting. Blush from the drugstore stained each round cheek a delicate, precious pink. I darkened the lines of their eyelids with Sharpie. Peter's black eyes were taken from a beaded purse that a well-meaning aunt had once gifted me, a look Bryn described as 40-something soccer mom goes on a post-divorce date. My mother held the babies and cooed like I'd finally given her grandchildren. "Darlings," she kissed me on the cheek and squeezed my shoulder. "My best-behaved kids." Bryn turned to my mother and held up the empty cereal box. "I'll have to leave for the store now if I want to outrun the storm." She was still in her sleep shirt and a pair of Milo's boxer shorts. The flap at the crotch was unpinned. Pale underwear kept peeking through. "I'll go." My mother already had her purse slung over her shoulder. Her long, dark hair licked the floor as she leaned over to kiss Bastian's head. "Be back in an hour." Behind us, the fridge clicked on, running hard enough to jostle the boxes of minute rice stacked on its flat top. Bastian set down his spoon and milk drooled from its bowl, leaking onto the quilted placemat. His eyes were sleepy. He swayed in his chair. I settled him in front of the TV, tucked a throw around him peppered with gray dog hairs and crumbs from the floor. He sucked his thumb and sniffled, allergies flaring up again. One of the dogs came up and curled beside him. Bryn and I went into my parents' room because I couldn't fuck her in the same place she slept every night with my brother. What had been my bed was now their bed, a bed for two people who'd committed their lives to each other. I could feel him there between the sheets with us, sad and hurt, and it made me want to cry. We stood in the doorway of my parents' room and didn't look at each other. It wasn't the first time it happened, and it wouldn't be the last. In order to do it, I let Milo drift until he was a far-off spot in my mind, a hazy blot on the horizon that I could pretend was something else entirely, not my brother, not any part of me. Bryn leaned into me and let her head fall on my shoulder. Time was always too short. All we had were afternoons, little minutes between work shifts. Will I ever get tired of this? I asked the question aloud, though I already knew the answer. You couldn't get sick of sustenance when you were starving. What happens now? She looked out the window, hand pressed against her belly. I curled around her back and put my hand over hers. It wasn't warm enough anymore without the blankets, but I didn't care. We didn't say anything, just listened to the rain lessen until there were only the drips pinging off the window's metal awning. I stroked one finger down her abdomen. "Bunny, bunny," I wished, mouthing the words into her damp neck. Okay, so just like one more little bit, and it'll be nice. It'll be sweeter. And just 2 pages about an owl. Thank you. God. Bless you all. One last good memory. We caught a baby owl that kept jumping from its nest. The mother built it into the eaves at the back of our house, a small, cramped space stuffed with pine needles and bits of bark. They're called leapers when they keep jumping. My father cradled the fluffy lump to his chest. Damn thing has too much energy, doesn't know he's nocturnal. After we'd called animal control, he and I sat in the backyard with the bird secreted in an igloo cooler between us. We drank Arnold Palmer's, heavy on the lemonade. I gave the owl baby little bits of grasshoppers I'd killed, a recent blight on the pink and white azalea bushes. The bird gulped legs, a head, meaty bits of fat torso. Let's call him Oscar. That's a good name for an owl. I stroked its round head with a fingertip. The head was the size of a golf ball and very soft. Shouldn't name wild animals, they're not pets. My father frowned and put the lid on the cooler, leaving just enough room for the baby to breathe. Mites appeared once animal control took the bird. Everything itched, tiny, barely visible dots that crawled into my eyes and hair, tickling the insides of my ears until I thought I'd go crazy trying not to scratch myself. My mother had to scrub down everything. She made us strip out on the porch before letting us back inside the house. She boiled our clothes in a vat on the stove, wouldn't even consider putting them into the washing machine. I stood in the backyard shivering in my underpants. Milo watched from the safety of the house, pressing his mouth against the sliding glass door and blowing wet air. His tongue left behind heart-shaped spots. When Milo wasn't looking, our dad smacked a hand against the glass. It scared him so bad he fell backward and landed on his ass in the middle of the living room rug. It was so funny, I thought I'd never stop laughing. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah.
Questions for our guests?
Anything you might like to ask? Yeah.
What was the seed of this? Why taxidermy?
Yeah. So I am a librarian, and I was I'm also just very interested in things that are very goofy and dumb. So I was doing this thing where at the time, before I started writing the book, I was doing a lot of deep dives on the internet about bad taxidermy. And it was just extremely hilarious to me, and I couldn't stop looking at it because it was funny to me on like a couple different levels. It was funny because I was thinking about how goofy they looked, but then also just like the idea that like somebody had spent like so much time crafting this thing and turned out something that looked like completely, usually cross-eyed or something like really wild and interesting. So I started doing like research into taxidermy itself because I love to research. So the more research I did, the more fascinated I became with how intricate and like what an art it is for people. Like there's so many different kinds of taxidermy to do, like how you taxidermy a fish is not how you taxidermy small mammal, is not how you taxidermy like large kill, is not how you taxidermy like a mount versus a whole animal. And I'm always very interested in how people process things. So I spent a ton of time doing that. And also like the genesis of this is before I wrote this first novel was I mostly considered myself to be a short fiction writer. And so I was trying to write a short story about a brother and sister who taxidermy a goat and they fuck up the goat. And it was the first time I wrote a short story where when I was done with the short story, I didn't feel done with the people. So, and that had never happened to me before. And I was like, okay, well, that's something then. So I set aside the short story and just decided to see what I could do with it and then continue to do research alongside of it. But the taxidermy part was so interesting to me because it was so continually weird. Like every time I thought I knew something about taxidermy, I was like, I know nothing about taxidermy. Like it's so involved in such a process and people take it very seriously. It's an art for a lot of people. So I felt like I wanted to be very careful with it too. So anytime I had taxidermy in the book, I like specifically looked up the things that were taxidermy to see how people do it. And it's like so detailed. There's like so much going on. But I would say it started from those two things, the idea that I love research so much. So it really fed into that kind of impulse I have to looking up things. And then also the idea that these people felt bigger to me than a short story, which had not happened before. Yeah.
Off the taxidermy route, since you mentioned doing a lot of research, are you more of like, you have books and computer research, or do you like go find taxidermists and interview, like are you more hands-on or not?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So at first, because I think the easiest way to kind of dig into stuff to see if you're interested is to be more like an online kind of idea to like kind of dig into it. So what I did at first was I ordered a bunch of books because there was also a certain type of taxidermy I was more interested in, like taxidermy from like the late 70s, early 80s, which is different than now. And then also, so I ordered a bunch of books, watched a lot of YouTube videos. You would be shocked at what you can watch on YouTube about taxidermy. And I'm saying be very careful if you look that up after this. I did it at work one day, and I was like, whoa! There's some people walking up behind me, and there was just a completely open pig. I'm like, I'm not a serial killer. It's for writing. So I definitely started like that. And then I kind of started dipping into, because I did want to have like more of a tactile experience. So from that, I went into like a lot of web forums, and I tried to be very conscientious about that, because it wasn't my space, and I don't do taxidermy. So I just was like an observer and didn't kind of try and make anybody have any interactions with me, but I wanted to see how people talked with each other about it. Like, what does the language look like? Like, it's one thing for me to say, like, how somebody taxidermies something. It's another for, like, a practicing person and day to day, and, like, how do they talk with each other? So I did that. And then I definitely went out to places like in Florida. You know, you guys know, there's like a ton of places you can go in like a taxidermy. Like, I think growing up, the church that my parents, like, there was like deer mounts on the wall and shit. So it's like, it's just everywhere. So you can look at it and kind of have this tactile experience. So I definitely did go out to places, but I tried to be considerate, knowing that it's like, it wasn't mine. But there was like, specifically this one thing I did, because there's this big convention that happens every year. And so I like kind of like live streamed into it and watched this guy like very tenderly taxidermy an alligator. And it was like, I was like watching it, I was like, oh, this is like the most like, because for him, he was doing it in this way that was like, because he was like this huge, very gruff, butch kind of dude. And he was like, this is my art. And I was like, this is like wonderful. So it was like very interesting to see this like way that people were like, how they process things, or like what, you know, like what for people is like art for them. And I was like, wow, because I am always thinking about like the domestic and how like arts and crafts work. And I was like, this like definitely filters into that, because it's like encompassing a lot of that stuff, like, right, like sewing work, or this idea of like kind of making, like maker spaces stuff. So I tried to be hands-on, but I also tried to be respectful of it, because I knew it wasn't mine. Yeah.
Do you live with any pieces of taxidermy, like Teddy Roosevelt had his memorial house?
Yeah.
A lot of taxidermy, a lot of heads and hides and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you actually have anything at home that you
I have a small, well, I did have a small piece. I have a lot of animals in my house, like live ones. Like I have 3 dogs and other assorted animals that I keep trying to get more. So I decided I wanted a small piece, so I ordered like off the internet, I ordered a taxidermied squirrel that was like rode on a bicycle, like how I wrote in my book. After I'd written it, I was like, oh shit, I can get one. And so it's the squirrel riding like a Barbie beach cruiser, like in a whole like really couture outfit. And I was like fascinated with the dogs went insane when I brought this in the house. Yeah, so I had that one piece, and mostly I was like, as I owned it, because I set it up on the shelf, and then every day I was looking at it, and all I wanted to do was open it up. I wanted to see like what they did, and so I ended up kind of busting it open a little bit, just because I was so fascinated by like the interior of like what it would be like, and then I had to get rid of it because then the dogs really lost their minds about it. But yeah, that was like the one piece of taxidermy I had. I would definitely own taxidermy again, though. I think it's like, especially when it's done really well, like I love the idea of like also marrying kind of concepts together, which taxidermy you can do, like not only just different animals, but like the idea of like creating scenes and stuff like that, which that's writing. That's like very interesting. So yeah, I had the one piece, but I destroyed it. Yeah.
How do you balance writing and being a librarian?
I think for me, what was very helpful, specifically in writing this book, is I had to create a schedule for myself. And I'm a big person of thinking about this too. Like, not everybody writes the same way. So like, just because something worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work the same way for somebody else. But for me, I knew if I wanted to like complete a big project like this book, because it was that's a lot of text versus like a short story. I gave myself specific parameters. So like, I gave myself a goal of doing Monday through Friday. I had to write 1,000 words a day. I could write more than that, cool, but I couldn't write less. And on the weekends, I could do whatever I wanted. If I wanted to write, great, but I didn't have to. And so then by, 1 week, that's 5,000 words. the end of a month, that's like 20,000 words. After a couple months, I have a significant amount of words. If they are doing anything, who knows? But I have a significant chunk of something, and it's in a document. So I decided to do that for myself. Another thing I let myself do was I didn't let myself edit as I went along, because I knew, since how I write short fiction is very different than how I write other things. I usually write I feel like I've heard Kelly Link describe this as she calls it typewriter style, where she and her sentences are incredible. So, but she writes in a short story where she goes she writes the sentence, a couple sentences, and then goes back up like this to edit, and then goes back down and does like this. You can't do that with that much text. It's just not reasonable. So I would only let myself even read the last paragraph that I had read just to see where I was in the timeline. And I kept a little Word document that just had important places and names. But that was, to me, having that, because being at the library was so exhausting, because working at libraries is you're doing usually several jobs, and you're usually working more than 40 hours and doing a lot of different stuff. And by the end of the day, I'd be wrecked and wouldn't be able to even focus my brain other than to be beer now. So I try and do it in the mornings or on a lunch break. And I was very serious about that. But I mean, that's how I did it. But I think people have lots of different ways of writing. But for me, I knew myself that I would need to do that so that I could get through a project. We'll see if I can. But again, too, I think it's good to vary stuff. So the next project that I've been working on, I've been working in a different way. So we'll see if that's good too. It's good to change things up, try some variation. We'll see if it works. I don't know. But yeah, it was good for me to give myself a couple rules. Not a lot of them, but just a couple so that I'd stay on task.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Art is amazing. I'm standing there, I'm thinking, without encountering this book and this reading, I would never have thought, one day you're a squirrel, and you're just leaping from branch to branch to branch, not knowing that soon your destiny will mean that your body will be put on a little bicycle, and then you're going to contribute to a novel.
Yeah, and a librarian will slice you open.
Talk about metamorphosis.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.